The time is now 5:30, Monday, April 18th, 2022. We will start the Finance and Purchasing Committee meeting, Committee of the Whole, Appropriation Ordinance, and Budget Discussion. Roll call, please.
Alderman Rivera.
Present.
Alderman Florian.
Present.
Alderman Hayes. Present. Noisio.
Here.
Alderman Newsom.
Sorry,
Here.
I can't hear you. Announce it.
Motion carried. I'll take a motion to approve the minutes from March 21st, 2022.
I'll motion.
Motion by Alderman Rivera, second
Second.
by Alderman Florian. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Approval of the minutes from April 4th, 2022, 5:30 Special Finance and Purchasing Committee. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Florian, second by
Seconded. Alderman Hayes.
Alderman Hayes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item 2, new business, and this is a continued public hearing regarding budget appropriation ordinance and revenue certification for the fiscal year, May 1, 2022, till April 30th, 2023. And I'll turn it over to Don Schultz. If any alderman wants to sit out in the audience because they're going to be on the screen behind us, you're welcome to do so while he does the presentation.
Isn't that the same document we have in front of us?
It is.
Okay, perfect.
Any water over there? Are you all able to see the screen okay?
Oh, we
We'll
have-
follow along in the,
You just follow along.
okay.
Preparation of this year's budget was really a rather complex and rather complicated. Not so much because of the size of the budget, although at $233.5 million, it's probably the largest budget in Waukegan's history. Certainly the longest one I can remember, and I think the longest any of the aldermen can remember as well. And it's complicated not so much only because of the size of the capital projects. We have $57.4 million in this year's capital project budget. It's also complicated by the fact that we're trying to address the needs of each and every department by fulfilling their needs for personnel and their equipment. We have 33 new positions in this budget. It's really a combination of all these factors that have made the budget rather complicated this year and rather complex document due to its size and everything it's trying to accomplish. And hopefully, with the tools that you all have, we can accomplish so much more this year. Planned expenditures, $233.5 million, $57.4 million of that in capital projects. Revenues are projected at $221.4 million. You see that there's a $12.1 million gap between projected revenues and projected expenditures. So right off the bat, you think that the budget is not balanced, but it is balanced. It's balanced across all funds. It's balanced by the use of revenues and other financing sources, and also by the use of unassigned reserves or fund balances, especially within motor fuel tax, American Rescue Plan monies, and water and sewer revenues. Sherry? If you can see that okay, you see we have 7 major funds that we're budgeting. 5 of the funds are budgeted with, they're balanced with recurring revenues, where revenues exceed or are equal to expenditures. The general fund has projected revenues of $66,500 over and above projected expenditures. Capital project fund, there's only one capital project fund, it's for streets. It's a small street fund, but it's getting $1 million from property taxes and $2 million from home rule sales tax for street projects. In addition to that, it'll have $500 thereabouts in estimated investment earnings. So it'll have a surplus at the end of the year of $500. Debt service funds, those are usually, ordinarily they're completely balanced, where revenues are budgeted to equal debt service on the outstanding general obligation bonds. Internal service funds, We have two this year, where in the prior year we had three. The internal service funds would be your employee benefit plan, which covers health insurance for employees and retirees and their dependents, and a risk management fund that covers workers' compensation and liability claims. What you had as an internal service fund last year, IT, Information Technologies, has been moved from internal service into a department within central services. And then the last fund, fiduciary, that has a large surplus. Fiduciary funds are funds in which we serve as a trustee capacity. We are a fiduciary agent for police pension and fire pension, and also the city's working cash fund, which is called the stabilization fund by some, is a fiduciary fund. It gets its revenues from employee contributions, investment earnings, and the city makes up the accrued or actuarial balance through the tax levy. And that'll have a surplus of over $18 million at the end of the year. Now, the two funds where you're going to see deficits would be in your special revenue funds. And your special revenue funds are special only to the extent that they have assigned taxes or grants that are used for a specific purpose. Oftentimes, these funds will accumulate resources over the years, and we spend in future years. You don't always spend the money in the same year it's collected. One fund that will have a deficit this year is the American Rescue Plan. We collected money last fiscal year, or the current fiscal year that's ending in just a couple of weeks, that we hadn't spent. It's carrying over into next year, where it'll be joined by the second contribution or allotment from the American Rescue Plan. Another one with a large use of reserve funds is motor fuel tax. Motor fuel tax currently has a balance of about $12 million. We'll be using that plus more to, plus current revenues to offset the cost of certain street projects and capital projects funded by motor fuel tax. Also, that where we're going to dip into reserves, the city has 4 tax increment financing districts. Those districts have accumulated funds over the years, and I budgeted them this year for capital projects with the understanding that if we can identify projects that are eligible for TIF financing within the TIF districts, we'll have the money available to spend. The other one where we're spending down a reserve is in the enterprise funds. Enterprise funds are like business funds. They're a business type activity. It generates its own money, pays its own bills. Water and sewer is an enterprise fund. So is a motor vehicle parking fund. It generates its own monies from the sale of water, from fees, from rental of parking spaces, and it pays its own expenditures. It's built up quite a fund balance over the years. Water and sewer right now has a fund balance of a little over $40 million. $12.8 million of that is left over from the 2020 revenue bonds. We'll be spending that money in the fiscal year 23 budget. So it looks like it's a deficit financing, but we're actually using monies collected in prior years to fund projects in next fiscal year. So when you consider the 5 funds that are funded entirely by revenues collected next year, and the 2 funds where they're going to be funded by revenues plus accrued reserves that are unassigned, they're not assigned for a specific purpose, so they're available to use in next year's budget. In that sense, the budget is balanced. This year's budget includes support for public safety and public works, with the addition of additional law enforcement officers. We're going to be planning on hiring 6 additional police officers, 5 additional public police auxiliaries. We have planned in the budget 6 additional fire medics, firefighter paramedics, and an administrative assistant for the office. In public works, we have in the budget 3 new laborers, engineering professionals. In IT, we have IT professionals in planning and economic development. We have planners budgeted. So in public safety and public works and the professional services, we have an additional 33 positions that are fully budgeted. We also have in the budget, carryover from last year's budget, is the proposed addition of a city administrator with proven experience in current city management practices, knowledge of state and federal laws and regulations, and cost-effective strategies for delivering public services. We have $5 million in this year's budget to replace some aged and fully depreciated assets in police, fire, public works, water, and sewer. We're talking about vehicles and different road equipment and construction equipment in those departments for $5 million. We have an increased training budget within all the departments, especially in police and fire, where you're bringing on new personnel. We increased the training budget. We also increased the training budget in the human resources department for new initiatives that our HR director would like to take part in with our employees, and also in risk management for cost-effective risk management strategies to reduce our workers' comp and liability claims. And the overall budget, of course, is structured to enhance customer service by giving each of the departments the tools and the personnel needed to provide the service. People always ask, how much money do we have in the bank? I'm not always sure what they're referring to because we have a number of different bank accounts, but we have certain reserves that we keep. Some people call it the rainy day fund. It's a stabilization fund. We are required by ordinance to maintain 8% of our general fund expenditures. Our general fund is appropriated $92.4 million. 8% of that is I can't see the number from here, 7.6 or so, or 7.2.
3.
We will have available in that fund $865,000 more over and above what's required by ordinance. The rest is will be maintained in that fund for emergency service purposes. In addition to the stabilization fund, you have the general fund, which currently has a balance of about $23 million. Then in addition to that, you have the water and sewer fund with its balances. So we feel that with this budget, we're maintaining our reserves at an adequate level. We'd like to keep the reserves at about 25% of operating costs, which is about 3 months' worth of operations. We have 1 month in the stabilization fund and at least 2 months or more in the general fund. You can see at the next chart, it shows the revenues, expenditures, and other financing uses by the 7 individual funds. And the red marks are the 2 funds that are going to show the use of unassigned reserved fund balances to balance the budget. The changes in fund balance, we only show the 2 where it shows that we're going to dip into the reserves. But you can see in terms of liquidity in this sense being what do we really have on hand, the cash that's available that we can tap into to meet any costs for next year's budget. Well, we built up quite a bit of cash in both the enterprise fund and the special revenue funds. And that prior chart that we lost, there you go, on the orange, that's the excess over and above what's needed. So there's plenty of liquidity in those funds to balance all the special revenue funds and the enterprise funds. And I might be having the hardest time seeing that chart. In terms of budget by function, it's good to we can look at the budget by those 7 individual funds, or we can look at it in terms of actual activities. And what you see, in terms of general government services, it'll take $24 million, or 10% of the total budget for general government services. Principal interest on our outstanding general obligation bonds, and will account for 5.6%, $12.9 million. Water and sewer operations, 5.3% of the budget. Capital projects is the big one at $57.4 million. 24% of the budget will be spent on capital projects. Now, these capital projects are funded to a certain extent with monies already on hand in motor fuel tax, water and sewer, American Rescue Plan funds. But there's a great deal of money, about $26 million, budgeted from grants, either federal or state grants. When the grants materialize, we'll move forward with the project. If the grants do not materialize, that project will be placed on hold until next year's budget. So just because we're budgeting $57.6 million in capital projects doesn't mean we're going to spend all that. Besides that, I don't know if it's possible to spend $57 million in one construction season. But at least we've been able to identify the projects and put them on the planning list for this year and following years. Public Works has a budget about $11 million, 4% or 4.8% of total. Public safety is always the largest part of our city budget. It is $96.5 million for public safety, or 41% of the total budget of $233 million will be used for public safety. Planning and zoning, 1%. Sorry, George. Planning, community, economic development, 2.3%. Culture and recreation, you wonder, what is culture and recreation? Well, it's real simple. There's a library for one at $4.8 million, and it's our beach. That's the culture and recreation budget for $5.2 million or 2%. Refuse collection is $5.3 million with another $300,000 for the Yeoman Creek landfill for cleaning out that site. And that's 2.4%. So you can see how the budget is allocated across all those activities. In terms of the projects, it may be difficult to see, but you can see it on your handout, where the infrastructure expenditures are going to go. $10.7 million for streets and roadways. $6.8 million is essentially unassigned at this point. I know the aldermen have turned in lists for their wards of $3.8 million. We have another $3 million for general street repairs. I know you'll all be working on actual uses for that money. And then you can see the other streets that are budgeted. And these funds are available, and they're available from motor fuel tax and from service transportation grants. Culvert repairs, that money is all available with our current money in the American Rescue Plan for culvert repairs. Glen Rock, Pershing, North Jackson, and Sherland Road. And I know Jesus and the engineering department is working on those culverts. Bridge repairs, we budgeted $11 million for street repairs. Again, we're going to be using Illinois Road and Bridge monies, motor fuel tax, and service transportation grants for $11.3 million. $5 million we have budget within the TIF districts. Now, 3 of those districts are contiguous, 7, 8, and 9. It's the South Lakefront, the North Lakefront, and downtown, which means you can use the monies in those 3 funds and put it all in one of the districts if you want. You can put it all downtown. You can put it all in the North Lakefront, all the South Lakefront. But you can use those 3 TIF districts and use that money. You can do streets, you can do sidewalks, you can do alleys, you can do landscaping, you can do building renovations. There's a lot you can use the money for. And I know Noel will be working on projects for the TIF districts. The other TIF district is McCaw Park, and that has quite a bit of money sitting in it, but you have to have a project specific for that location. Water and sewer projects. What is that number? 13.5 million for water and sewer related projects. You don't need to wait for that money. You have it available now. It's $12.8 million in leftover from the 2020 bond fund, the revenue bonds, also the reserves, unassigned reserves in the water and sewer fund. In terms of the funding of the capital projects, 22% will come from the American Rescue Plan. Eligible uses of the American Rescue Plan money. When they finalized the rules and regulations, it allowed for infrastructure, for streets, highways, bridges, culverts, in addition to addressing the effects of COVID. Motor fuel tax, $3 million, 5%. The service transportation grants, local and for bridges, $3.9 million. Water and sewer, from the water and sewer fund itself, $6.9 million. From the revenue bond fund that's left over, $12.8 million. From Rebuild Illinois money, a small portion so far for bridges, but there's at least, we're going to get $5.9 million in road and bridge funds, using just a small portion of that in next year's budget. The rest will carry over for future years. Certain taxes in the TIF district, federal grants. If you don't get the federal grant, that project will not move forward. But I know they're making applications now and trying to get our share of the federal dollars. It's quite a lengthy process to apply for the federal funds. CDBG is also providing support for infrastructure. In terms of where the grants come from state, federal, and local sources, You can see $9.8 million from American Rescue Plan, 3.1 from Surface Transportation Local. You have federal grants on the Washington Street Bridge and new pedestrian bridge. That'd be a new bridge off to cross over 41. It depends on a federal grant. So those aren't guaranteed projects. They'll only move forward if we receive the federal grant. CDBG is going to provide support. There's a brownfield grant for Margaret Street. But to give you an idea, there's $26.8 million in intergovernmental support that we're budgeting. Upgrading our vehicles, our equipment, our facilities for $5 million. Building department will get a staff vehicle, Public Works. This money can be moved around to when they identify specific needs, whether it's an end loader, a bobcat, a pickup truck. I know they're looking at lawnmowers, so for a comprehensive program over the summer. The fire department, from American Rescue Plan, an ambulance, command vehicles, a fire engine. The council's already approved those a couple of meetings ago, and we'll be purchasing those in fiscal year 23. In the police department, you've already addressed that. You gave authority for the 15 squad cars. Those will be coming out of next year's budget, again from the American Rescue Plan. And the replacement of police and fire equipment and vehicles is an eligible use of American Rescue Plan monies. The water and sewer utility, pickup trucks, a front loader, a backhoe. And if funding is available, we have we've identified additional uses. If the narcotics forfeiture money is available, there's money that can be used for the replacement of police equipment, whether it's equipment or vehicles, whatever assigned use the police chief and his staff comes up with. And they put in a federal grant for another fire engine. Whether or not we receive that grant, we apply for it on an annual basis. It's the luck of the draw, how many applicants, and where we stand in that list. The new positions are identified on the next chart. Support and IT, the city administrator and HR generalist, a licensing and zoning officer, the fire medics, the admin assistant, the engineering staff, laborers, a mechanic, police auxiliaries, police officers, the deputy police chief, to go from 2 to 3. Risk management will get assistance to help our risk manager. The planning department will get assistance, and water and building will get a revenue coordinator. Those are the 33 new positions. There's also another 3 firefighters budgeted in a SAFER grant. If we receive the SAFER grant, we'll be able to hire another 3 firefighters. If we do not receive the SAFER grant, we will not be hiring the 3 firefighters. The next chart simply shows the allocation. We're now up to 514 employees. You can see a large portion, over half, is in police and fire, followed by public works and water and sewer. Central services in building will round out to 514. The budget in brief, the budget totals $233.4 million. 40% of the budget will fund general operations of the city. That's your primary operating funds: police, fire, public works, the building department, all essential services, planning and zoning, economic development, all comes from the general fund. 40% of the total budget. 24% of the budget you'll find in your special revenue funds, and we have 21 special revenue funds. They all have a specific purpose. Debt service, we have 11 outstanding general debt service funds to pay the principal and interest on our outstanding debt. Some of the debt is paid by home rule sales tax, and that debt is abated each year. It doesn't hit the property tax roll. Enterprise funds, a large budget of $33 million. $19 million of that will be for capital projects. The rest will be for operations and water and sewer utility, 14%. The internal service funds, again, it's going to fund health insurance, risk management, and the fiduciary funds. That'll cover the cost of police and fire pensions. In terms of the budget, department by department, will be the next slide, which I'm sure you can't read those numbers, but you can read it off your chart. The general fund will have an increase of 15%. This year's budget, we're asking for it to be amended to make recognition of a large increase in revenues collected this fiscal year. The economy was on a terrific rebound in this current fiscal year, well beyond our expectations. We had increased the revenue projections we were given last year. We increased them by at least 5%. Our revenue projections fell short by about 12%. Revenues came in 12% even greater than we had anticipated. And all the major revenue in the tax sources came in well above budget. Income tax, sales tax, home rule sales tax, replacement taxes, income taxes, all exceeded our expectations. In next year's budget, we are anticipating a leveling of those sources. We are not budgeting additional tax sources. As a matter of fact, we are budgeting less in total taxes next year in the general fund than we received this year. This year in replacement taxes, the personal property replacement tax, we ordinarily receive about $5.3 million. In this current year's budget, we received $9 million. We are not budgeting $9 million next year. We're budgeting it back at what we've historically received at $5.3 million. If we receive more than that, wonderful. But we don't want to budget the $9 million and have the economy take a backslide. We want to be more careful than that. So it looks like a big increase, but revenues came in so much stronger, and we expect a normal return to normalcy in many respects. Food and beverage tax is way up. Hotel motel tax is way up. The video gaming tax is way up. All the tax sources exceeded expectations. In addition to that, permits, licenses, and fees exceeded budget. So it was quite a robust year. Can that continue? We hope so, but we're expecting more of a leveling of the revenue stream. We are not anticipating large increases. We are not budgeting for that. In terms of special revenues, you can see the large increase in the American Rescue Plan. We're going to spend $14.8 million in the American Rescue Plan for its assigned purpose. We're not in business to hoard money. We're not a bank. We receive this money to spend, to serve the public, to provide the money we need for streets, for highways, for bridges, for culverts, to buy the equipment that we need to provide the service. The American Rescue Plan is going to help to a great deal, to a great extent in that regards. The Waukegan Library is funded primarily through the property tax. 90% of its funding comes from the property tax, of which it's receiving $4.6 million this year to cover their $4.8 million budget. Foreign fire tax, that's insurance companies that are outside the state of Illinois that sell fire insurance to companies in Illinois. They pay a tax. We expect to receive about $150,000. We have money built up in that fund, so we budgeted $250,000. And there's a fire pension. There's a board that they decide how to best use that money, and they use it for fire department purposes. Refuse collection, it looks like, and I've been asked this question a couple times, so we might as well address it. The current year's budget is $5,370,000. That's based on what was levied back in 2020. What we're actually spending this year is $5,111,000, not 5.37. So it's really overstated. So in doing the tax levy for 2021, I took the current number of residences that we have where there's garbage pickup, applied those units, applied the rate, increased it by 3.75% that we've been quoted by the refuse company, and $5.3 million is levied, and $5,111,000 times the 3.75% is $5,303,000. So it looks like it's like the budget's going down, but it's not. It's actually an increase over the current $5.1 million. Since the budget, since we're actually going to be spending $200,000 less than this current year's budget, that $200,000 sits in that fund. So there's an additional amount in that refuse fund. I understand there's discussions going on now with the refuse company where they're looking for an increase because of gasoline prices. I think that's correct. That money will be available if that so happens. Motor fuel tax has that large budget of $17 million. That includes the $3.6 million that we're going to receive in motor fuel tax, plus monies that have been accumulated in that fund over the years. So there's over $12 million in that. Plus there's grants that will be received in motor fuel tax from the Surface Transportation Program. There's a number of grants received in public safety by police and fire. We're budgeting those grants. If they receive the grants, the money is budgeted. It'll be appropriated. They can spend it. If they don't receive the grant, they can't spend it. Pretty simple. The CDBG has an allotment based on a formula. And I think you all see the action plan on an annual basis. You see the action plan. And I know Larissa will make presentations to the board when there's time to use that money. You see the TIF districts are budgeting. We're budgeting what they're going to collect in revenues and the incremental taxes that will be received by those 4 districts, plus what they have in that fund. If we don't identify projects, that money will sit in the TIF district for a length of time until we need to distribute it to the other taxing bodies. So the idea is we know we have projects out there to be funded. We need to identify those projects and carry forward with them in the next fiscal year. Their prison review or the DOI grant is a grant. Local forfeiture, narcotics forfeiture, that's all dependent on how much money is actually released to us in terms of our fair share for the forfeiture. There's a good deal of money sitting in the narcotics forfeiture fund. We budgeted it to spend. If the police department has a use for it, they can identify a good use, the money is available to spend. It can be used on vehicles, for equipment, to cover personnel costs, overtime costs. There's a number of uses, and the police chief and his staff will identify those uses. It doesn't serve any useful purpose for us, simply to accumulate reserves in those funds. Now, where does the money come from? Oh, there's more funds, aren't there? The capital project funds, very small capital project fund, $3 million for streets. The other capital projects that we talked about are all within water and sewer, within the American Rescue Plan, within motor fuel tax. But the one capital project fund we have is designated just for streets. Debt service, we talked about that. That budget is $12.9 million, almost $13 million. Down 9%. You'd like to know that next year it'll go down $4 million. And we'll talk about that as we get further along the slides. And I promised Sherry I would not drone on for an hour and 50 minutes like last year, so I'll get moving. Internal service funds, we've talked about those. It's health insurance for employees, dependents, retirees at $10.5 million. The risk management fund, $5.4. We increased the funding this year. We had a larger surplus in the general fund that we could have presented, but we took a good portion of that reserve and put it into the risk management fund to cover our claims. As you can imagine, with workers' compensation and liability claims, we need to build up a reserve in that fund. Fiduciary funds, you see those police and fire pension funds. We really have no control over that. This is the pension received by retirees in police and fire. In terms of projected revenues, you can see the majority of revenues will come from taxes, a number of different tax sources. 54% of $119 million. Fees and charges for the services that are provided. They're user fees. You use the service, you're charged a fee. $19.7 million, 8.9%. Miscellaneous fines, whether it's parking fines or moving violations or Lake County fines from the magistrate, from the courts. Water and sewer sales, $15 million, 7% of the total revenue. Premiums. Premiums show up as an expense in one area and as revenue in another area. They show up as an expense, like in the general fund. We make premiums. They're premium payments on hospitalization. Each department pays health insurance premiums for its employees. Employees pay a certain percentage, what is it, 9%, 10%? The city pays 90%. It shows up as an expense in the departments, and it goes into the internal service fund as revenue. The same is true for workers' comp and liability. It shows up as an expense in the individual departments, shows up as revenue in risk management fund. And in the fiduciary funds, those are contributions. You can call them contributions, you can call them premiums, but employees pay into that, the city pays into that. Intergovernmental revenue, I think we've already identified those at $26 million, which is really a nice sum, and probably more than we've recognized in prior years. But I think there's been a good attempt this year to identify as many sources of outside support as possible. And interest earnings. Now, we get real excited when we see that we're going to gain $16 million in interest. Don't believe that number. It's not going into the general fund. That's the expected investment earnings in our pension funds. When you have $300 million to invest, you can gain certain amounts. We're only gaining less than 1/4% in our own city money. So very little is budgeted for interest in the general fund. But there's a good amount invested in the pension funds. And hopefully the market will start improving. In terms of taxes, where does the tax money come from? Home rule sales tax. I think you've seen in the amendments that we're proposing for this year, we amended that proposal by $3 million. We are not projecting an increase for next year. We budgeted $11 million for next year, 11.6. This year we're going to collect about 12. Property taxes, that's a deceiving number. The general fund really doesn't receive any money in the general fund, but it has to report property taxes that go into the pension funds on behalf of fire and police. Because according to the Government Accounting Standards Board, they want you to show the expenditures for police and fire within the police and fire departments, so that you have a true cost of police and fire. Now, if you have to recognize the pension expense in police and fire, then you might as well you have to recognize the revenue that also goes in. It's basically a wash, but it makes it look like we're getting $53 million in property tax. You're actually getting $37 million. I think it explains at the bottom. $16.7 million of the property tax is double counted, which happens every year. The TIF increment from our 4 TIF districts, we're budgeting that's going to come in at almost $5 million. Sales tax will come in at $12 million. Cannabis excise tax, no, we do not have any dispensaries in Waukegan. That's an excise tax that's collected by the state and distributed statewide. That's simply our share of the excise tax collected by the state. Local use tax, 3.7, similar to what we're collecting this year. Utility tax, there's really no change from year to year. Our utility tax seems to be pretty flat at 4.2, and we're budgeting the same amount. Telecommunication tax, income tax. We're receiving more than income tax, more than $11 million in the current year's budget. I'm not expecting, well, I am expecting it, but we're budgeting a little less than we're receiving this year, again, as a cushion. Replacement tax, we're only budgeting $5.3 million. This year we're going to receive $9 million, a large increase. And that's based on a certain percentage of corporate profits. And corporations and profits in the private sector in the economy last year has been very healthy. We are anticipating just a normal look at next year's budget for replacement taxes. 911 surcharge, that's the fee that's on a phone bill per line. There's not much change from year to year. The food and beverage tax, it's a healthy tax. It's a little bit of an increase over the current year, but not much. The video gaming tax, $1.5 million. Last year we budgeted $1 million. We're bringing in $1.5 million. You can see that there's been an uptick in activity. That money is split evenly between the police and fire pension funds. $750 goes into the police pension, $750 goes into fire pension. Does not go into general fund. The foreign fire tax, and of course motor fuel tax that we talked about, $3.6 million. In terms of individual funds, the general fund. Again, revenues are projected at 92.5 million, expenditures at 92.4 million. There's a little bit of a cushion there of $66,000. The bulk of revenue in the general fund is supplied by taxes, 74%, from those various taxes that you saw pretty much on the prior page. Fees contribute 9.5 million. Fees or charges for services. Permits, 6%. Our license at various sources of licenses, $2.8 million. Miscellaneous fines and whatnot, $3 million. The franchise fee, that's a fee from cable, the franchise fee. That's where the revenues come from. Expenditures in the general fund, general government, $8 million. Public works, 9.5 million, 4%. Public safety, almost 30%, 29% of the general fund budget, $69 million for public safety. Building and zoning, 2.4 million. Planning and economic development, 2.9 million. Culture and recreation, that's the beach, for 400,000. The refuse collection and environment, the major refuse collection from the hauler is out of a special revenue fund. The $256,000 is the amount for Yeoman Creek that comes out of the general fund. Special revenue funds, we said that there's 21 special revenue funds with a budget of $49.9 million. Taxes will account for $22.4 million. Intergovernmental revenues, in terms of grants and support from the state and local, from state and federal sources, $26 million. In other miscellaneous sources, about $1 million. In terms of taxes, home rule sales tax goes into the home rule sales tax fund, which is a special revenue fund, and that's used to pay debt service on street projects, or can be used for street projects. This $2.1 million will be used for debt service. There's $2 million sitting in that fund that we're going to transfer. It doesn't show up as an expenditure because it's going to be a transfer out of the fund into the street fund, along with the $1 million from property tax to provide that $3 million for local streets. Then you see the motor fuel tax, a tax increment from TIF districts in the 911 surcharge. Intergovernmental at $26 million. Primary source, the American Rescue Plan. We're getting our second installment. They call them tranches, whatever a tranche is. Well, we received half of that in this current year. We spent a little of it this year, but most of it will be spent in fiscal year 2023. We're receiving another, it'll probably come in May or June, another $9.8 million. The library receives a literacy grant. Public safety, police and fire both apply for a good number of grants. We budgeted those. Rebuild Illinois, we have one more payment coming for Rebuild Illinois at $978,000. I think we get 6 payments. We received 5 so far. Rebuild, that's the Rebuild Illinois. The service transportation grants for local and bridges. Federal grants for streets. We're applying for them. Whether or not we receive them will determine whether or not we do those streets. A safer grant for 3 additional firefighters. Again, no grant, no firefighters. CDBG is an intergovernmental form of support from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And a planning grant for $400,000 for Margaret Street. Revenues, $49.9 million. Expenditures, $56.4 million. Yes, there's a deficit. It appears to be a deficit in the special revenue fund, but it's covered by unassigned fund balance that we talked about in the American Rescue Plan and motor fuel tax in the TIF districts. There is no deficit. $13.4 million will be provided through accrued and unassigned special revenue fund reserves. Earmarked motor fuel tax, American Rescue Plan, TIF district. The next table that you can review in detail if you want is, these are the 21 different kinds of special revenue funds. They all have a specific purpose. They all have a specific funding source. The money is used only for those sources. You may find transfers from out of, if it's allowed, like out of the home rule sales tax fund, we can transfer into debt service for streets, or we can transfer for street projects themselves. Otherwise, the money will stay in there. Another transfer will be from McCall Park, because there's a TIF bond for McCall Park. That was the developer's bond that we did. And the TIF revenues that are collected each year goes towards the payment of the debt, and the balance sits in that TIF fund to use for projects if we have any within that district. But you can see it shows that there will be a change in fund balance of $13.4 million covered by unassigned reserves in those funds. In terms of specific uses, 61% for capital projects, $34.6 million. $5.3 million, we talked about that. That's the refuse collection. Culture and recreation, we talked about, $4.8 million. Planning, community, economic development, $2.3 million. Public safety, with the grant funds out of public safety, $7.5 million. Debt service. Debt service is a fun one to talk about because we're paying down our debt. And it's good to see that. We have debt because we issue bonds to carry out certain construction projects, infrastructure improvements that we can't fund with available revenues or with revenues that we're identifying to be received but not sufficient. So we issue bonds. We have 3 bonds. There's general obligation bonds. General obligation bonds are bonds in which you pledge the full faith and credit of the city. That is, you're pledging your property taxes. You're telling the investor, your security is that we're going to levy as much as we need to levy to cover your debt. And so those are general obligations. We abate 3 of those bonds using home rule sales tax. And you can see on the one page that in fiscal year 23, we're going to retire $1 million in principal using home rule sales tax. We're going to retire $1.7 million using TIF revenues. We're going to retire $6.3 million from the tax levy that we approved last December. The total amount that went on the tax levy was $7.8 million. If you see it carried all the way to the right, that along with certain fees, plus the county would pull on an extra 1% to make sure we collect enough that's sufficient to pay the debt. SA, that's the special assessment. We have a special assessment bond out there. We collect special assessments from the property owners and also what the city shares. We're going to retire $132,000 of the special assessment. In total, you can see the $12.9 million in debt service. I like the next chart because it shows that in fiscal year 23, through our property tax levy, it's $7.9 million. You see what happens next year. It'll drop down to $3.9 million. Then drop down further to $3.2 million. Then it levels off until it drops again in 2030. But you'll see unless of course you issue new debt, you'll see the general long-term debt, the general obligations of the town decreasing substantially. The next chart just shows in graphic form the annual decrease in what's required to pay off debt service. This chart shows of the total debt, how much is paid by the different sources, how much is home rule sales tax, how much is it responsible for the total debt, how much is the property tax responsible, how much is TIF responsible. We know that at the beginning of the year, at the end of this fiscal year, we will have $97.3 million in outstanding general obligation debt. We'll retire $9 million. At the end of the next fiscal year, we'll have $88 million in outstanding general obligation debt. $21 million of that will be paid by home rule sales tax, $40 million by TIF revenues. Only $26 million of that $88 million comes from property tax. So it's good to know that the full debt service is not going on the property tax bill. We've identified other sources, home rule sales tax and TIF. In addition to the general obligation debt, you have other forms of debt. You have water and sewer debt, what they call business type debt. You did water and sewer bonds in 2018. You did water and sewer bonds in 2020. You currently have outstanding $32.9 million in water and sewer bonds. We'll retire $1.4 million next year. You'll have a balance at the end of next year of $31.5 million in water and sewer bonds. You have that is outstanding. $580,000 outstanding in parking bonds. You'll retire $530,000 of that next year. You'll only have $50,000 left to pay off in the next year in the parking bonds. The parking bond is done. The only parking debt will be the parking lease. And there's still a lease on the parking meters. Then you have your special assessments. $1.3 million in special assessment debt outstanding. We're going to retire $132. At the end of the year, you'll have $1.1. You have a parking meter lease. You had 3 leases in this fiscal year. You had a lease on the snow plows, a lease on the ambulance, and a lease on the parking meters. We paid off this fiscal year the lease on the snow plows and the lease on the ambulance. And that's part of the amendment that we've asked you to look at and to approve this evening. We're recognizing that additional revenue we brought in this year and to pay off those leases, to get them off the books. So that'll leave only the lease on the parking meters. But you can see your total debt. If you actually look at total outstanding debt, the revenue bonds, the general obligation bonds, the leases, the special assessment, at the end of the year, you'll have $121.7 million in outstanding bonded debt. We can probably turn that. Well, it'll be, it's on one page. Okay. You see the general obligation, what they call government activity bonds. Is that the same page, 90 million? With the water and sewer, the parking system, total business debt, 121.7 million outstanding. You see the amount paid on that. GO bonds, home rule sales tax, 21 million. McGaw Park, 40 million. The property tax, 26 million. Revenue bonds, all paid by water and sewer and by parking. The leases, paid by the parking fund. And the special assessments, of course, by annual special assessment. In addition to the long-term bonded debt, there is other debt that we report. We don't have balances yet for fiscal year 22. We haven't finished the year yet. So we really can't tell you what that, what that debt is amounted to. But in addition to the debt that you issue bonds for, or you take out loans for, or you do leases for, you have other post-employment, what they call other post-employment benefits, OPEB. That's the city's obligation for health insurance for retirees that the city is obligated to pay over a long-term basis. You have compensated absences based on current language in collective bargaining agreements and based on current language in the salary ordinance. Employees accrue a certain amount of paid time off, vacations, holidays, sick time, personal days. When they leave the employment of the city, they're paid out for accrued and unused paid time off. a calculation is performed each year. We take each individual employee and said, okay, if all employees are to leave right now, what's their obligation? We know we're never going to have to pay off that obligation all at one time, because it just doesn't happen that way. Nobody leaves all, you're not going to lose 514 employees all at one time. But the total obligation that's outstanding is $6.7 million at the end of last year. You can expect it's going to be higher. If you have salary increases of 1%, 2%, whatever it is, you can expect this compensated absence to go up, unless you're losing a lot of senior employees that are going to get paid out before the end of this year. But there's other senior employees that will take their place. So, environmental cleanup. We're responsible for that debt. We pay a certain amount each year. You see this year it's $256,000 on the Yeoman Creek landfill. Our total obligation is $1.7 million. We're assessed a certain amount each year. Unfunded police pension liability, $160 million. Unfunded fire pension liability, $111 million. So you take the $295 million in that liability, add it to the $145 at the end of 21. That's how you get the $440 million long-term debt outstanding. At the end of 22, we'll add into the 132 whatever these other categories will amount to, the compensated absences, the OPEB, the pension liabilities, and whatnot. Okay, the internal service funds, real simple, medical insurance and risk management. Internal service fund, they're funds that provide services for other funds of the city. The health insurance fund provides services in providing health insurance benefits to retirees, to all the employees, and assigned to other departments, other funds of the city. Risk management, same thing, covers workers' compensation, liability claims, provides a service to the other departments. The departments pay a premium into that fund, it shows up as revenue. They pay the claims, shows up as an expense. Risk management, we're budgeting $5.4 million. Will we come in at $5.4 million? How do we know that at this point? We don't know when certain liabilities are going to pop their heads up, when certain claims are going to be levied against the city. All we can try to do is budget what we know as no known claims as of now, make certain projections on workers' comp based on historical experience, and try to fund an amount sufficient to cover that, plus put a little cushion in there. What we need to do at this point forward is to build that cushion. We need a reserve in that fund of $4 to $5 million to be comfortable. Retiree health insurance, we're a fully insured plan. We pay our premiums to Blue Cross Blue Shield. They pay our claims. There's no fund to build a reserve into. We budget the full premium in the departments. And all premiums, you should know that when you look at personnel benefits in the budget, they're all budgeted at 100%. We are assuming that employees are hired, they're on our payroll from day one. That May 1, we've hired all 33 of these employees, that we have no vacancies anywhere, and that we're paying full benefits starting day one. We know that's not the case. So although we budget a large amount in personnel benefits, that's the cushion we always budget, because we know we're going to have unforeseen emergencies that happen during the year, and we're going to go over in some line items. Not intentionally. These are it's unintentional. It's no different than in our own household. It happens. So we need to protect ourselves. We protect ourselves by having that stabilization fund, by having reserves in the general fund, but also by making sure we budget personnel costs at 100%. Even though there's going to be vacancies during the year, even though we know we're not going to have health insurance premiums, workers' comp premiums, liability, any of that at 100%. Water and sewer, are we on that one yet? Water and sewer is always fun to budget because it's its own little business. It's a business type activity. We sell water. That's what they're in business to do. And to sell that water, they collect fees. They collect sales on the sale of that water. They collect other fees as well. But basically, it's for the sale of water and sewer and for sewer charges. it's built up quite a nice balance over the years. And some of that is due to deferring some capital projects into future years. But now you have the money available. You can address some of the concerns you have at the water filtration plant. Antonio and Jesus can identify water sewer projects, and they can get started on those, and engineering can get started on them. And you can see we have $19.7 million in budgeted water and sewer projects. Not saying you're going to do all of them, but we've identified based on, I think they ranked them on a priority basis, what they really needed to do, and we try to put money in those places. The parking system, it collects certain rents, certain fees, certain monies in the parking meters. We rent out spaces. It pays its own. It's supposed to pay its own costs. It doesn't really, at the present time, it's not really generating enough revenue to cover all of its own expenses. We put $600,000 into the parking fund to alleviate some of the stress on the parking bonds. And you can see that on the revenue side, that's part of where that comes from for parking. Home real sales tax, $600,000. Parking fees and rents, the other $400,000. That's how you get to the million. Revenue bonds, we talked about the revenue bonds outstanding, the water and sewer, the first lien water and sewer bonds in 18 and 20, and the parking fee and sales bonds in parking. Fiduciary funds, there again, police pension, fire pension, we talked a little bit about this last year. Video gaming tax, we'll put $750,000 on each. The percent funded is interesting. We need to be 90% funded by the year 2040. Are we going to be there? According to our actuary, if we follow the actuarial assumption, assuming that we hit our assumptions, we'll be there. We're trying to help that along by putting additional monies in that fund to the video gaming tax. Right now, we're 46% funded in fire, about 46% in both funds. You can see what the unfunded liability is. You can see what amount the city contributes in terms of, for IMRF, the city is budgeting 12% of salaries for IMRF. In police pension and fire pension, it's 53% and 56% for fire and police in terms of a percentage of their salary that we put into the pension fund. Investment earnings, it assumes a certain rate of return. That's how we got the $15 million you saw on that earlier page. Employee contributions, why they're not the same, I don't know. That's up to the legislature. The firefighters contribute 9.45%, and police officers 9.91%. The stabilization fund, that's a fiduciary fund. That's why it appears in fiduciary. You can see the amount where we need to be at 90% and where we are currently. Next page shows simply what we talked about, the net pension liability on both those funds and the percent funded. And lastly is the tax districts. We have 4 TIF districts. Relatively new, they're not really that old. 3 of them January 2014, 1 January 2015. You can see the initial EAV for the 4 of them was $36 million. Today, those 4 have an EAV of $75 million. They've increased 107%, the tax base in those 4 TIFs. The amount of increment that we've received to date in those 4 TIF districts, to date we've received $10.8 million in increment. Private investment in those 4 TIFs, $65 million in private investment in those 4 TIF districts. Our public investment so far has been $22 million. Our fiscal year 23 budget, $5.4 million. There again, we'll be working on, I know Noel will be working on with the board, identifying projects in those districts. And finally, the last page shows how much we're expecting in increment and how much we've budgeted. We're expecting 4.9 million in increment. We're budgeting 5.4 million in those TIF funds. Sherry, did I go over 30 minutes? I did.
You did approximately an hour.
Any questions? No? That's good.
Alderman Florian?
You knew I'd have some, didn't you? Thank you for that, Don. It was very informative, and thank you for asking the hundreds of questions I've asked you up until this moment. But I actually have a couple more. So we expect to have a dispensary and a casino at some point in fiscal year 23. You did not account for that at all in this presentation.
Well, the only part, you all hear the question? Have we accounted for any casino revenues in the fiscal year 23 budget? The only part that is an amount that we expect to receive on an annual basis, and that's the land lease. We budgeted $3 million in next year's budget on the land lease, because you know we're getting that. It's not based on gaming revenue. If we don't get the land lease, if there's an option to purchase the property, if they purchase the property at the agreed upon price, our recommendation to the council is you put that money, you don't spend it, don't identify a project for it. You put it in the bank and we draw an annuity. We'll draw $3 million from that purchase amount on an annual basis. So we'll have $3 million every year for the next 10 years going forward.
Right, but what I'm asking about is the taxes, the revenue from the gaming and the
there's no
taxes
gaming,
from the marijuana.
There's no gaming revenue tax in this budget. No.
Okay, so where is that money going to go when it starts coming in?
In the bank.
Right, but is it going to go towards the general fund? Is it going to go, is the gaming money going to go towards the pensions like the other gaming money has? I mean, we have no plan according to this budget of where that money is going. Is it just going into the general fund?
It would either go into the general fund or we would create a special revenue fund for it.
Well, I've requested several times that we create a special revenue
revenue
fund for
fund.
the marijuana tax money.
To keep it separate from the city.
Yes.
That would make sense. Yes.
Well, I hope that we.
Well, we won't be receiving that until when would you think? Not for another 3-4 years, right? Any gaming revenue?
I'm talking about the marijuana dispensary.
Oh, there's going to be the temporary facility though.
Yeah, the temporary casino's opening in July.
Yeah.
So it's going to be most of fiscal year 23.
So just to clarify, although we had a casino come in and request zoning relief, and they had been conditionally issued a license, no additional licenses for dispensaries have actually been released by the state due to ongoing litigation. So we unfortunately have no idea when a dispensary will open up in Waukegan. It's a statewide problem.
Well, we already have one that got a license and came to the planning and zoning and got approval.
They're not allowed to open though by the state.
Really?
Yes, their license, although they were awarded it, has not been released and has been held up by a judge in Cook County.
Oh.
And yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yes, so we are now we're now more than 2 years after legalization, and we still only have 105 dispensaries in Illinois because of this litigation.
Okay. My next question is, you said that you project we'll have about $8 million left at the end of this fiscal year. Is that the number you gave?
Yeah, that was a preliminary number about a few weeks, a month ago. It's a little greater than that.
So, okay, awesome. I like hearing that.
I know.
So in this budget book you gave us earlier, there was an appendix, and in the back it says use of surplus, and it says the city must avoid the use of year-end surpluses to fund ongoing operating expenses. Any surpluses realized, blah, blah, blah. And there's a couple choices here, and one of them is a capital replacement program. I do not believe this city has ever had a capital replacement program. I think we should put that 8 million, 9 million, whatever it turns into into a capital replacement program so that we don't have to add to the debt you showed us up here of whatever $100 million it was, when we need a new fire truck, when we need a new police car, whatever it is we need, we have money sitting in the bank where we can just write a check for it. We don't have to tax the residents. We don't have to go into debt. We have actual money sitting there to replace capital needs. So that's my pitch, that we do what you told us to do. You have it right here in writing, and that's what you suggest we do with it.
Part of the amount that came in greater than budget that you see with the amendment, there were also increased costs that we're amending because we're not using the American Rescue Plan money to offset lost revenue or offset additional costs due to COVID. We had significant costs in overtime and in workers' comp claims. And we budgeted at the beginning of the year, we had what, $3.2 or $3.4 million deficit. So part of that amount that's over and above the $8 million, part of that's going to cover that deficit. But there's still a deficit. Even if you take out the $4 million, you're still having a surplus of $4 million.
Okay?
Or
That's what
or whatever use the
I
the
think
mayor
we
and the
should take
council
your
comes up with.
advice. I think you're smarter about money than all of us up here, and I think we should take your advice. One last question. On the motor fuel vehicle parking fund, you said most of the special revenue funds like water and so on pay for themselves, but the motor vehicle fund costs $1 million plus, $1.5 million, and only makes a little over $1 million. We're losing $500,000 on parking. What are we doing?
We're actually losing more because we're transferring 600.
That's true. You're right. So it's really it's $1 million we're losing on parking. What are we doing? Are we doing it wrong? What are we doing? How can we lose $1 million on parking?
Would our police chief have an answer?
I don't know if I'm going to say this 100% the correct way, but IBS is the new program that just came in. So last year, we spent a lot of money on that program to put in all the new parking meters, and the program's been a little bit slower to get going, and estimated, again, we had a guesstimate on what we think revenue was going to be from that for next year. So we don't truly know what that revenue is going to be. Fair?
And we budget revenue very low.
So this may not be quite accurate, you're
We
saying?
hope not.
We might only lose $500,000 instead of $1
No,
million.
we're fortunate that that fund has a little bit of a cushion in it to cover that.
Are we 100% with the parking situation as far as all the meters and all the monitors in the parking lots are working properly?
So we are still dealing with one in the parking garage, but yes, the pay boxes are working.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Don.
Oh, Alderman, thank you.
Any other alderman? Alderman Bolton?
Yes, I have a question. On page 9, we know we get a lot of concerns about public safety, and I see on page 9 where public safety and parking is 41% of the projections. Can you explain in detail or elaborate on what this number reflects? Is it, how did you come up with that? Page 9. The graph. And maybe you could put it back up there for the community to see as well.
All the public safety at 96 million?
Yes.
Oh. The question is, on page 9, it shows public safety at $96.5 million, 41.3%. That's the total expenditure on public safety, not just the police department and the fire department, but anything related to public safety. I consider the parking would be part of public safety. The police pension and fire pension is public safety. All the police and fire grants that we're budgeting is public safety. The foreign fire tax is public safety. So it's not just the operating departments of police and fire per se, but it's anything related to the police department and fire department. So pension costs, operating costs, grants. Does that answer?
Yes, thank you. My second question, on page 29, it says special revenue funds. We know our community is asking for additional funds when it comes to educating our youth and decreasing violence. So would this entail any of that? Page 29. It's our special revenue funds.
Are you asking if the use of ARP money?
Yes, just to elaborate, yes.
Yeah, that's why it's called special revenue funds.
29? I must have a different 29.
What is your question, Alderman Bolton? Can monies out of this special revenue fund be
Yes.
used for the
It
city?
says activity financed by Pacific Tax and grants. And I was just wondering, any monies going towards, a little bit more towards public safety, decreasing violence and supporting our youth?
It says that the funds are restricted.
Well, that'd be within the individual departments of police, how they use their monies.
Certain activities,
And it's restricted.
yes.
So you're asking, can the forfeiture funds be used for,
Can the forfeiture funds be
Be-
used for, Chief,
Oh,
can the
sorry.
forfeiture funds be used?
Because I know we had talked about, offering our youth, like, police academies, supporting, developing relationships with our police, developing more safety environment,
The specific question was about our seizure fund and what we can use that
Yes,
for.
yes. Would that be entailed in this?
So it could. Seizure funds, federal seizure funds, we can basically use for most things involving the police department with the exception of salary. That is the only thing that we cannot use that seizure fund for. So equipment, programs, I would assume that we could put money into that if that's what we chose to do.
Community outreach.
Yeah.
Yes. And we have in the past.
Correct.
We funded the basketball program and different things like that. As long as it's not salary.
Thank you so much.
any other questions, Alderman? Alderman Hayes?
Thank you, Don, for the presentation. It's riveting. I have a question. In fact, I got a text message, so I'm just going to read this to you because I'm having some difficulty locating exactly where in the presentation it is. But I think it'd be starting around page 9, it has to do with the SCADA funds for water and sewer. And I believe it starts on page 11. The question is, SCADA has, it says 3 million on page 11, if I'm not mistaken. It says electrical for SCADA, but then the previous slide, according to the text, says 1 million. Or it's-
That's interesting. Alderman
If I'm
Florian
repeating
had
it,
the
I
same
apologize.
question, yeah.
Could you just elaborate on that for me, or provide an explanation?
It's in two different areas. There's $3 million. If you look at water filtration plant improvements, there's $3,310,000 in that. $310,000 of that is going to be used for bathroom upgrades, the kitchen, the office fixtures. But $3 million of that is going to be used for the electrical work necessary for, is it SCADA?
SCADA.
And then the other $1 million is actually for the equipment itself.
Water plant was put in 1967. So 3 million, it's a total of like 4.2 million for the SCADA upgrade and the electrical.
So some of the money is just coming from one fund and some of it's coming from another, right?
Yeah.
That's why there's two different amounts, I think.
Okay.
It has to do with the same equipment. The electrical is so old, it's not just with the new page. So basically just switch out the old electrical.
And that's what the $3 million is for.
Yeah.
The $1 million is for other upgrades. For the actual SCADA. That's really helpful, thank you. Thanks, Don.
Any other questions from the alderman? We have a question. You have 3 minutes.
$90,000 a year for another $850,000. I want to know what kind of legal service we got. That we need to spend another $850,000 in 1 year. So on page 7. Page 70 in budget, that's our 9. Page 70. $850,000 increase on legal fees.
We don't expect to be anywhere near that amount. Initially, that amount was going to include all the legal work necessary for the American Place Casino. That is now being offset by the developer's escrow. It was also at one time going to be used to pay for all of labor relations, but now we've identified individual departments for labor relations. If it's police negotiations, we budgeted labor relations and police. If it's fire, we budgeted fire. If it's local 150, we budgeted public works. So the number really is somewhat inflated. And I think Stuart would probably even tell you that. Yeah.
We got a $50 million grant from the government, $50 million one time, right? So,
Yeah,
correct, we got a grant from the government for $50 million for the pandemic to get our city back on, right? Am I right or wrong?
You're wrong.
I'm correct me if I'm wrong.
I haven't seen the $50 million. We haven't seen $50 million. $50 million. No, not 50 million. ERP. We got 20 million. Yeah, we got $9.8 million we received last year, or this current year, and we're going to receive another $9.8 million next year. I said we didn't receive 50 million.
When it should be 2-3% down the board, but it's going up 28%. Where's the money coming from? Off the taxpayers' backs.
This budget doesn't propose any increase in taxes.
According to that budget, it's a 28% raise for the mayor, secretary, 6%. Chief of staff, I think it was $30,000 a year. I mean, it's just, I was like, these numbers are like way out there. I'm like, where's this money coming from? Because if we planted it off the grant, whatever the amount is that we got from the federal government, then that's a one-time deal.
The grants that are budgeted are only used for, in our case, for capital projects. There's no grant money used to pay salaries. There's no grant money used to hire employees. There's no tax increase in the budget to pay for salaries.
Of running the city of Waukegan, how much does it take to run the city of Waukegan for 1 year? How much do we spend?
Well, the current year's the budget for.
$76 million. Is that true? Is that around that number?
Sorry, what was the number? Sorry.
$76 million, what it takes to run the city for 1 year. Am I right or wrong? Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sitting up doing all. I'm not an accountant. but I can count money.
You're probably looking at a number for the general fund
Yeah,
alone.
Clyde, are you asking for like what was last year's budget to run the city?
180,
Okay, what was last year's budget, Don?
181.
What was last year's
About
budget?
$81 million in the general fund, with an
180.
amendment for another 5.
181 million was the budget last year. I think, Clyde, when you ask how much it costs to run the city, there's a lot of answers to that because you're talking about personnel costs, you're talking about capital improvements, you're talking about insurance. There's a lot of different, when you say run, do you mean what the personnel costs are or the capital projects costs or all those, how much you have to pay for debt? All of those things, I guess, for some people would be, that's why you put the budget together. That's what it costs to run the city.
From 2020 to 2021, how much did the city of Waukegan spend? Simple question.
We would have to go back and look at the expenditures, yes. Yeah. When he tells you the budget's balanced, that means that we're spending as much as we're bringing in.
I know I'm not illiterate, I just asked a simple question. Nobody can give me an answer. Say I don't know, don't make me look like
Do you want, no, do you want, Clyde, do you want, run is to me, that means a lot of difference. Personnel costs or everything included to, do everything the city does.
Give him the total budget.
We've already told what the budget was, and we're not at the end of the fiscal year, so we can't tell you exactly how much the fiscal year costs to run the city. We haven't reached April 30th yet. That's the end of the fiscal year. Then we will have final numbers for you.
from 2020 to 2021, this is 22. So you couldn't give me
I don't know, I can't remember what it was, 2020 to 21. We're talking about 21 to 22, 181 million budget. That's what we have budgeted. Whether we're going to go over that, we cannot tell you because the fiscal year has not ended yet. We plan on not going over.
Yeah, I understand that. But one thing, my question is, I'm trying to see where this extra money coming from. Where are we left? I don't count left that I ain't got. I can plan on a couple of $1 million to come in my organization or in my pocket, but if I ain't got it, I can't count it. What extra money you talking about? I'm talking about the $850,000 for legal fees for next year. I'm talking about $30 more thousand to our chief of staff. I'm talking about 6% rate. The government, we're waiting on the president to sign the inflation thing, so everybody going to get a 2% raise. So when you put these numbers together, you add up 2 more to them. It's already a 28% increase on that budget. I've been studying that budget all week long, and every time y'all change it, I have to change my numbers. It's been changed 3 times in 1 week.
So whatever is in that budget, whatever that number turns out to be, Clyde, whatever that number turns out to be, okay? The revenues, he explained that we're increasing revenues, and those revenues will go towards the budget, whatever the different buckets are, right? So that's where the money comes from. The mayor and the staff create an estimate what they want to do, what they want to spend. That's the budget. Each department here say, hey, I need this much money, that much money. Total it out, just using the big picture, right? Trying to keep it simple. They total it up and say, hey, we need X number of dollars. Do we have a revenue? Yes, we do have a revenue. Where does the revenue come from? Property taxes and fees and so forth and so on, right? And then based on the revenue, that's what's going to cover the budget. The budget is just an estimate or what we estimate we need to spend.
A
okay?
budget is just a wish list.
Wish list, thank you.
And just one other thing to add, Clyde. Don had made perfectly clear that we're not spending money that we don't have. So we're going out for grants, and we want all these, new trucks and everything, but we're not going to spend that money, and we're not going to buy anything until we have the grants in hand.
In hand. It's a wish list.
Because a budget is a plan. A budget isn't where we know for a fact this is going to happen. This is what we want to happen. This is what we expect to happen. This is what we're planning for. This is our goal for the year. This is what we want to see. But we won't know till we get there. Just like this last budget, we really don't know for 2 more weeks whether we're close. We know we're close. He said he thinks we might have even done better than we expected. But we couldn't have predicted that a year ago. Do you know what's going to happen a year from now?
No.
Well, we have to plan. We have to plan as if these things are going to happen. And like he said, if we don't get the grant, we don't do it.
Right.
But we already have ARPA funds. We already have a lot of this money sitting here. We know we have it. The money in the motor fuel tax fund that's going to pave roads, we've got it.
I understand that. I appreciate it. I understand that. My thing is, my question is, how can you put these raises on our employees and we ain't got the money?
But we do, Clyde, and we have.
So there you go. We already got the money.
We have 2% raises that are in their contracts. Most of our employees are union contracts, have union contracts.
2%, right? We're not 6%.
Hold on, hold on.
Who's getting
Who
Hold
said we?
on, Clyde, listen, the budget does not guarantee any positions or any raises. It does not. Just because it's in the budget, you could put in a 50% raise for a person. That does not mean they're going to get that. That will be voted on when we vote the salary ordinance. In 2 weeks, a salary ordinance will come before us, and that will then we'll vote on it, and then that means that this position can get this position can get that. Again, the budget is a plan based on historical data, based on trends, that they think this is how much money we're going to get. So, yeah, it's the money you don't know you have. It's not in your pocket yet, but it's based on historical data. You say, this is what we think we're going to get this year. In the system that we're dealing with, this is the amount of money we think we're going to get.
And we are not budgeting 6% raises for anyone.
No.
Thank you. Are there anyone else that have any questions? We need to get on with our finance committee. We haven't started yet. Being no more questions, we're going to move on. The hearing is now closed.
Madam Chair, if you
Yes,
could
sir.
take a motion to close the public
Okay,
hearing.
can I take a motion to close the public hearing? Motion by Alderman Rivera, second by Alderman Florian.
You can do that by
At-
voice vote.
At 7:04, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item B, motion to approve an ordinance adopting an amendment to the fiscal year 2022 annual budget and a supplemental appropriation ordinance for fiscal year 2022. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Florian, second by Alderman Hayes. Are there any questions to this motion?
Better not be down at 20.
Roll call, please.
Alderman Rivera.
Aye.
Alderman Florian.
Aye.
Alderman Hayes.
Aye.
Alderman Moiseo.
Aye.
Alderman Newsome.
Aye, motion carried. Item C, motion to approve the annual budget and appropriations ordinance for the fiscal year beginning May 1st, 2022 and ending April 30th, 2022. Motions by Alderman Florian. Second by Alderman Rivera. Are any questions to this motion? Roll call, please.
Alderman Hayes.
Aye.
Alderman Florian.
Aye.
Alderman Rivera.
Aye.
Alderman Moiseo.
Aye.
Alderman Newsome.
Aye. Motion carried. Item D, motion to approve a resolution reallocating the City of Waukegan 2022 private activity volume cap of $9,399,830 to the Village of Buffalo Grove, Lake County, Illinois. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Moiseo. Second by Alderman Hayes. Are there any questions to this motion? Roll call, please.
Alderman Florian.
Aye.
Alderman Rivera.
Aye.
Alderman Newsom.
Aye.
Alderman Moiseo. Aye. Alderman Hayes.
Aye.
Motion carried. Item E, motion to approve an ordinance authorizing the disposal of a surplus 1995 Seagrave LR44DH ladder truck, serial number 85011. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Alderman Rivera,
Second.
second by Alderman Florian. And this is disposal of a truck, old fire, in the fire department. Are there any questions to this motion? Roll call, please.
Alderman Moiseo. Aye. Alderman Hayes.
Aye.
Alderman Florian.
Aye.
Alderman Rivera.
Aye.
Alderman Newsom.
Aye, motion carried. Item F, motion to approve a resolution approving an agreement with Aircon Refrigeration and Heating Incorporation for HVAC upgrades to fire stations 1, 3, and 4 in the amount of $680,619. Motion,
So moved.
Alderman Florian, second by Alderman Hayes. Are there any questions to this motion? Roll call, please.
Alderman Rivera.
Aye.
Alderman Florian.
Aye.
Alderman Hayes.
Aye.
Alderman Moiseo. Aye. Alderman Newsom.
Aye, motion carried. Item G, motion to approve a resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement with the Beach Park Fire Protection District for installation and operation of public safety communications equipment. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
By Alderman Vera, second.
Alderman Hayes.
Alderman Hayes. Are there any questions to this motion? Roll call, please.
Alderman Moiseo. Aye. Alderman Hayes.
Aye.
Alderman Florian.
Aye.
Alderman Rivera.
Aye.
Alderman Newsom.
Aye, motion carried. Item H, motion to authorize the procurement of paper and office supplies for fiscal year 2023 from Office Plus Solutions and Supplies, Warehouse Direct through AOPD/NCPA Joint Purchasing Contract, NCPA 11/18, in the not-to-exceed amount of $100,000. Can I get a motion?
I'll motion.
By Alderman Rivera,
Second.
second by Alderman Florian. Are there any questions to this motion? Roll call, please.
Alderman Moiseo. Aye. Alderman Hayes.
Aye.
Alderman Florian.
Aye.
Alderman Rivera.
Aye.
Alderman Newsom.
Aye, motion carried. Item I, motion to approve a resolution approving an agreement with Hawthorne Strategy Group for professional communications consulting services for fiscal year 2023 in the amount of $108,000, plus reimbursement of reasonable out-of-pocket expenses. Can I get a motion?
I'll motion.
Seconded.
Motion by Alderman Rivera, second by Alderman Hayes. Are there any questions to this motion? Roll call, please.
Alderman Hayes.
Aye.
Alderman Florian.
Aye.
Alderman Rivera.
Aye.
Alderman Newsom.
Aye.
Alderman Moiseo. No.
Motion carried. Item J, motion to approve a resolution approving agreements with First Responders Wellness Center for professional therapy and wellness services. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Alderman Moiseo,
Second.
Alderman Florian, second. Are there any questions to this motion? There was no not-to-exceed amount on this because it's as need and it's per service. Roll call, please.
Alderman Newsom.
Aye.
Alderman Moiseo. Aye. Alderman Hayes.
Aye.
Alderman Florian.
Aye.
Alderman Rivera.
Aye.
Motion carried. Item K, motion to approve a resolution approving intergovernmental agreements with Lake County for access to law enforcement software solutions. Can I get a motion?
I'll motion.
Alderman Rivera, second by Alderman Hayes. Are there any questions to this motion? Roll call, please.
Alderman Hayes.
Aye.
Alderman Florian.
Aye.
Alderman Rivera.
Aye.
Alderman Newsome.
Aye.
Alderman Moiseo.
Aye.
Motion carried. Item L, motion to approve and authorize the execution of a change order to the professional service agreement for parking and traffic engineering peer review services with Sam Schwartz Consulting LLC in the amount of $19,700. Can I get a motion?
I'll move.
Alderman Hayes, second.
I'll second.
Alderman Rivera. And this money is coming out of the developer's escrow. Are there any questions? Roll call, please.
Alderman Rivera.
Aye.
Alderman Florian.
Aye.
Alderman Hayes.
Aye.
Alderman Moiseo.
Aye.
Alderman Newsome.
Aye, motion carried. Item 3, reports and communications. We have several reports, but in the interest of time,
Get them
if you...
ourselves.
Okay, the committee and the council has all of the reports and communications. So can I entertain a motion to adjourn?
I will motion.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Rivera, second by Alderman Florian to adjourn at, what time is it?
7:13.
7:12.